Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teachers in the Dungeon. I'm Tom Gross.
And I'm Dan Ream.
And we are the Teachers in the Dungeon.
Always and forever.
Well, the honeymoon period is over. Labor Day has
Had our
passed.
first fight.
We're talking about at the school, not you, not Dan and I. No, we're into the school year now.
Yes.
A football game has happened, blah, 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 all that kind of good
left
stuff.
to be said.
Game club is rolling.
Oh, yeah.
So we had our geopolitics this week.
The library's buzzing with excitement.
Yeah.
Energy.
So next week will be board games and then RPGs come to Game Club in 2 weeks.
I've got 2 weeks to figure out what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
it's Drakenheim.
It is, and if I get if I get the returning group, they ended on a cliffhanger kind of, so we will just plop them right back in.
Well, I know 2 of your players are full in. They've already asked me if they can be in your group, and I said I'm pretty sure that's expected. The others I'm not so sure about, but I think it's pretty likely that you will have that. I have to share with you, if you haven't looked at, we always poll the students after they've joined. Like, we've got the firm roster of Game Club, then I send out a form asking like interests and things like that. And this year, since we did the RPG demos meeting, all of the DMs got to share, this is what my campaign is going to be like this year. And so I asked on the form, if you had your choice, which game would you play in? You are like not even close. It's like the old Michael Jordan Bulls versus the worst college basketball team. You had 23% of the votes, and the next was our student Annabelle at 5%.
Oh.
So, and then everyone else after that.
I beat the girl.
You beat the girl and everybody else, but everyone was really excited to hear about yours, and I think the Drakenheim, but I think it's you. I think it's you they're interested in having. But nonetheless, it is all rolling, and can't wait to talk about our Game Club year as we go through the year. And then, we're already planning next summer.
Yeah.
Those plans are in its infancy, but they're coming along pretty quickly. We've got some really cool things and exciting things to talk about as we get a little further along in that.
Yeah, we do.
So today's show is our What We've Learned series. Mm-hmm. And today we're going to talk about what we've learned about RPGs in education.
Seems appropriate.
It does seem appropriate. And normally I feel like I can probably talk to this, but I know that you have done pretty extensive research in the last few weeks in preparation for our next presentation at IdeaCon, which is Illinois Digital Educators Association, I believe. We're going to be doing a presentation there. So you've been doing research on this. Mm-hmm. So you have research. I just have experience. So I'm going to go with the research over experience in this case.
Yeah, I'll put the skeleton out, and you can put the flesh golem over it.
We'll see.
We've been on this path for quite a while.
Yeah.
And I feel like, actually, as an aside, I find myself thinking, man, I feel like we're hitting our stride with this, and I'm already on the countdown to retiring from teaching. I'm like, my timing sucks. This is terrible. But as I think about it, really the D&D craze, I mean, it really picked up a little bit pre-pandemic, but yeah. And education is always a little behind the curve, I think, with some of these things. So honestly, the things that we are investigating, I think, are still pretty current.
Yes.
Really. I don't feel like we're behind.
I mean, the game of D&D amongst D&D players was thriving pre-pandemic. Mm-hmm. You had the interest with the online games, Matt Mercer, Critical Role. That was starting to rev that engine up. And then, the pandemic, and people are like, well, what are we going to do now? Yeah. I want to do stuff with people, but I can't do stuff with people. So, I would agree. So the timing, when you put all of the universe together, the timing was almost perfect for role-playing games when the pandemic hit.
There's a small but growing body of actual scholarly research about this topic and about how RPGs affect just people in general, but also are effective in education and the methods that are the most effective, that sort of thing. So I have just been slowly compiling some research, and actually our friend Adam Watson did all the heavy lifting for us. He's got on his KYR Kyed RPG. His website and his newsletter, he had put out a blog post compiling a lot of the recent research
Okay.
that's been done.
Yeah.
So I picked from that and kind of summarized. So I've got a summary of psychologically what's going on with RPGs, and then some examples of in the classroom, and then also in game club.
Okay. That sounds good. When we talk about this and when you just did that outline, I was like, okay, I can see some of these things in our own school. And I hear you talking about some things that maybe we could do a little better. So let's hear the research.
So there's a lot of different studies going back. Actually, in fact, it's interesting. Some of this research goes back to the 1980s. Some of the earliest ones that we found. And most of the psychological research is clinical in nature, as you'd expect. So it's dealing with people with disorders or disabilities, and how D&D, how RPGs can aid them in therapy and treatment. But it has recently been broadened just in general to a more educational focus. So I've got kind of a bullet point list here of skills and attributes that are affected by RPGs.
Okay.
That are enhanced or developed by them. So it's kind of I feel bad as I look at this list. I think it gets muddled when I list them all, but they're pretty powerful examples. So skills and attributes, the ability to reflect, building of empathy, negotiation, collaboration, and communication skills, teamwork, problem solving, and then kind of a catch-all, but cognitive flexibility and adaptability, and evaluating options, consequences, and choices.
Okay.
So
I can picture all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And boy, even last night watching the kids running Geopolitics, which is the game that they made, the kids, that is, watching them go through that decision-making process and looking to somebody else and hearing them say, what if I did this? Or could you do this if I did this? I mean, those are just two small examples of the things that you're talking about there. You know, the one that stands out to me, though, is that first one, reflection. I was looking through some articles on ASCD today, and one of them really had a focus on metacognition, and that gaming, I believe, is what the context was. I was skimming, so I'm pretty sure gaming was the context of it. And they were talking about how metacognition, that thinking about one's own thinking, really comes into play very unconsciously in this, because you're constantly thinking about, if I did this, my character does this. And to me, it's making that threaded connection between, I'm thinking about a character here, but I could be thinking about my own life. If I make this choice, then this happens. If I make this choice, then this happens. And those are the connections we want the students to start making. So the reflection was important. And I think, and I know you have thought that, or are aware that that's something I'm interested in, because when we did our first summer camp, remember at the end of each day, I wanted kids to fill out reflective journals. Right. It just does. It's not intuitive. It's more intuitive to talk to people. Yeah. And so I don't know how to record that in a way in which they can then come back and really be metacognitive and think about, now, what did I say? How did that process change what I did next time, or something like that? I don't know. But that's a great, very, to me, tangible list of things that role-playing games does.
And I was speaking to you just before we started here. I was talking to our principal about all of this, and I'd mentioned that she has no experience with role-playing games, and probably no interest, but she is genuinely interested to hear about them and about their impact. And she started asking questions when I talked about the fact that the skills that students develop, and she said, well, like what? And so I was explaining to her, and she goes, so I forget how she put it, but basically it kind of helped me focus too. I said, yeah, it's a very collaborative game. You can't win on your own.
Right.
I left out the part that nobody
wins, but yes.
But I said, if you don't work with people, your character will die. And that clicked. And said, oh, okay, I get it. And so that is really interesting. And again, the research bears out that not only are those simple facts about the game, but because of that, the students or the subjects' capabilities improve because of RPGs. And I would be interested long term if someone would do a study on some of the more complex board games and see if that has any kind of effect. I mean, I would guess that it would have some, particularly the cooperative games where you have to work together against the game.
That's what I was just thinking. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not aware, but I also haven't actively searched out board game research as far as education and learning goes. My assumption would be the same, that they both would show similar findings. What makes me wonder is a board game is much more short term.
Yeah.
You do have an end to a board game, whereas RPGs are ongoing until you stop or, whatever. But I wonder if that would have any bearing on it. But certainly that'd be kind of a cool thing to research as well, kind of alongside.
Particularly, well, we have the perfect opportunity because students would be playing board games repeatedly over the course of the year for game club,
right?
So we could just check in with them and see if we see any evidence of that.
I was just thinking when you said that was when you've got that list there, you're talking about communication, negotiation, empathy. Empathy is the one that kind of catches me on this one. You've done diplomacy in your class. We've talked about it here before, but now in the context of like that first research article that you mentioned, do those terms or skills resonate with you through that game? That I pulled that empathy because I know that diplomacy can be contentious.
See, I would say that's an interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because my first gut reaction is no, the empathy is not rewarded in diplomacy, so I would not expect it to be enhanced. So because it isn't cooperative, you can cooperate, but only to achieve
until you're backstabbed.
Right, exactly. So yeah, I would guess it would come down to the type of game, but already you can see a professor could have an entire career exploring all these avenues.
Yeah.
If they chose to do the research in this. The one other thing I was going to mention about this list is that the research also does show there is evidence that these effects are transferred. The way they describe it is transferred to the real world.
Got it. Oh, yes,
so
yes. Okay.
It's not just that, I became a more empathetic D&D player. There's evidence that it actually then carries over into real life, which makes it a powerful tool. I don't know if we'll talk about this as a whole separate thing later, but if you're in the education world, you know that social emotional learning objectives and all of that are sort of the hot topic. And this sounds like RPGs are a powerful tool to help enhance social emotional learning.
Yeah. That's kind of where your angle is coming in the research that you've done, but this is stuff that's kind of on the side or on the periphery, or is it right in the heart of the SEL?
Well, I feel like a lot of it is, it's not 100% coverage. Part of SEL is going out and being active in your community, which is a little more of a civics, politics type of a thing.
Right.
And I'm sure you could stretch it to make it fit, but on first glance, at least at Illinois standards, 80% of them, 70% of them match up. I could easily pull and apply to RPGs in general.
Okay, this is looking good. For
Yes.
RPGs in education. What else did you learn?
So kind of the second and third things as far as classroom and game club. So classroom, I've said this before, and it makes me a complete heretic, but I think it's actually somewhat difficult to successfully and efficiently integrate RPGs into a high school classroom. It can be done, but I think it is very much dependent on the subject matter. And if I'm ever at a RPG education conference, I'm sure I would be flamed endlessly for that, and shown where I'm wrong. And I would like to be, I would love to know examples of how did you do this in a biology class?
Not being in the classroom anymore, but having been in the classroom, this is my kind of answer to this, and it's just from my own experience. I think it's a very much a mindset thing, and my mind, even though I'm a huge RPG player and we study it, we talk about it, all of that, I can't get I'm too traditional, I think, in my head, that I really like I can see. Like, I could watch somebody else gamify a classroom, which RPGs and gamification are two different things, but to slide an RPG in there and pull all aspects of your curriculum in and through that tunnel, I personally cannot, my mindset is not there. My training has been for something completely different. Mm-hmm. Now, if I was a new teacher and I didn't have those things set in my mind, I do wonder if it would be a little easier to step back and go, okay, so I have roles in my classroom, and I need students to fill these roles. And so when you come in, you're going to follow this sort of pattern. Again, that example I just gave, I have no idea if that's what it would look like or not. But I think it's very heavy upfront to prepare that for your class. And second, I very much believe it's a mindset that if you're a traditional teacher or even just been trained in something that's not role play based, I struggle to wrap my brain around it.
Yeah. And our friend Nate that teaches French, I think that is a very natural fit and very easy. Anytime you're using the language, you're doing it right. Yeah. And so, get the kids so invested in the RPG that they kind of forget they're using the language. That's when you've really hit the sweet spot.
Right. Yeah, he's doing really cool things there. I did want to mention at this point that this is a conversation that's not just you and me. Yeah. I think this is a conversation for our whole community. Mm-hmm. I would love to know if you're in a classroom and you have aspects of your classroom that are role-playing based. Man, I'd love to know that and love to hear how you do it and maybe even have an opportunity to communicate. By no means am I an expert in this, and mine is very much based on my experience of running a game club and being in a library. You've got more classroom experience and you've done research, but again, let us know, and we're not done, but let us know through Gmail, teachersinthedungeon@gmail.com. What have you been doing? What have you researched? What are your observations? That only helps our whole conversation as we go through this. But I think the point of this conversation, besides it's part of our series of what we've learned, is how can we make this more integrated into education? Mm-hmm. How can RPGs help education become better? How can it adapt to our students today that are very much screen-based and very much instant gratification-based? I think RPGs can reach that audience. So, sorry, that was my soapbox.
Yeah.
Back to what you learned. Yeah, back to your research.
I would say this is an oversimplification, but I'll just throw it out there as a starting point, is I feel like middle school is sort of the window.
Okay.
Because most of the things I've heard about, including our friend Adam Watson's friend, Justin Gadd, has been very successful with integrating RPGs into his curriculum. Mm-hmm. It's at the junior high level. Yeah. And I just think there's more flexibility. Okay. And this sounds like I'm disparaging, and I'm not. I feel like there's probably less content and more skills. Oh, okay. Junior high, grade school. Sure. So it's a little easier because I think it's much easier to use RPGs to build skills than it is to build content. Knowledge.
Okay.
And again, I want to hear out there the solution to this problem because I haven't figured it out. In U.S. history, you'd think natural fit. You just role play history. Well, yeah, but the whole point of role play is freedom of, choice. And we can it'd be cool to, what if Benedict Arnold chose not to sell out? What if he'd stayed loyal? Or what if the French had decided that it wasn't worth risking their fleet at Yorktown? Yeah. But okay, that's interesting, and that is a nice little experiment, but now we're inventing content rather than talking about the actual content. And yes, that can be useful to compare, and you can do some of that, but I feel like the game would lead you down that path so much that you would have much less time to analyze what actually happened.
So that just opened a door of a memory that I I forgot that I had. Years ago, I used to teach an American Studies class, and it was 2 classes in one, a history class and English class, and we taught it for 2 hours with 50 kids. And we opened our class, so it was the colonists coming, and the integration or lack thereof of integration with Native Americans. And so before we taught the content, we gave the kids roles, and we said, you're going to be this group. And so we went French and English and Native Americans. I think we had 4 groups. And then we were lucky enough to have a very large park across the street from the school. And so my friend Rich, who co-taught with me on this, we went over there, we mapped it out, and we gave everybody territory.
Okay.
And we created an imaginary river and some resources. And so then we told the kids, plan here, how are you going to survive this? Colonists, how are you going to survive in the new land? And Native Americans, how are you going to deal with these, quote, invaders? And so they, in the classroom, did all this planning. We went over to the park and said, now, plan it out. Are you going to have conflict? Are you going to have conversation? Who owns the river? Blah, blah, blah. And so it got heated. It was almost like a diplomacy, but there's no necessarily backstabbing. So then what we did is then we brought it back to the classroom, and we said, okay, what were the problems? You guys can all settle down now. This was just a role play. What were the problems? And obviously they pulled up, well, they wouldn't share the river with us, and they wouldn't let us do this, and blah, blah, blah. And their land was better than ours because we gave them geography as well. Like, this is a rocky area versus a sandy area versus a nice cropped area, or a nice land for crops. And so they talked about all of it, and we said, okay, you now understand the problems of colonizing and dealing with people colonizing. Let's see what really happened. And then we went to the textbook. And so we felt like they had a much better understanding of what we were reading, and it had more meaning to it. So I don't know. I'm not saying that's the answer, but
that makes sense.
That's one way that, because I'm with you. Right is right. It's history. Right is right. I guess there's some leeway to that. But so in a role play, you're making it up. Mm-hmm. But I think what your role play are the situations of history.
And I think yes, I would agree. And I think that's perfect that gets them emotionally invested and makes them more interested. Yeah, I think when I'm imagining is sort of what I see some of the super teachers do, which is weave it continually through.
Sure.
And I think that gets a little tricky at the high school level, but maybe not. Maybe there are solutions. One other thing I did want to add to this before we move on to the last section is I actually went to a session at Trade Day, Gen Con, where a college, I think he's a professor or a PhD candidate, one of the two, he did some action research. There might even be another term for it. He actually developed a role-playing game around the Sophocles play Antigone and brought it into a classroom, and that's how they taught Antigone. So he had the teacher, and he was there to facilitate, and the students all had roles and things like that. And his findings were pretty fascinating. I mean, he said that, kind of a 2 cheers for RPGs, because student engagement went through the roof. Behavioral problems went down. Okay. And student cooperation, definitely better. Quiet students spoke up. All of that is just perfect what you would want. Mm-hmm. So that's the 2 cheers.
Yep.
You don't get the third one because he admitted, he said once the game was over and they went back to real life in the classroom, all of those gains disappeared.
Gosh. That's like building the tower and then knocking it over, because, wow, that's amazing. I mean,
and it's just one study, but
right. What a study to work with and see what the variables were to that. Because, boy, you would think, like, logically, you think something would stick, like the friendships or the collaborative nature. But the fact that they went back to normal. I mean, So two things. Yeah, it's knocking down the cards, but also, so there is something to the role playing.
Yes.
It's how do you get it past that?
And I
How do
think
you
that's
bring it
probably
to
where
real
you,
life?
you have to find a way to continue somehow
Yeah.
with that. But
Okay.
so the last thing is, what we've learned about RPGs in education does kind of sit around game club. And this is just observational.
Okay.
Because there's no research that I found that singled out game clubs. So a lot of it's similar, but I think it's more intense in game club and more easily visible that you do see at the most general level a sense of belonging.
Got it.
That these kids come into the library and they're with their fellow gamers and they can let their guard down, and there's just this positive energy. It's very obvious, just their excitement. And sometimes it boils over and you got to rein it back in, but it's never we're bored and we're looking for something to entertain us. They're so excited about whatever we're doing that they just kind of lose control, which is pretty powerful. I do see a lot of growth in interaction, and you've seen that much more, but just as we've talked about, I don't know if we've talked about much on the show, there are individual students we can look at and see over the course of their years in game club, they've gone from being, quite frankly, a little dysfunctional to being willing to step out and volunteer and show up when they don't have to help fundraise.
Yes.
Which means interacting with the public and having to take money and give money, how can I help, working concession stand.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have been in my comfort zone as high school. And I see a lot of these kids that are willing to do that.
Yeah.
And you think they wouldn't have put themselves out there if not for game club. And so there's that by itself, but then the fact that it is forcing them into situations where they're developing those interpersonal skills, I think is very powerful.
I would agree. The thing about a game club that where I am personally right now is I've been there long enough. The game club has run long enough. This is my 11th year with this club. And you'd think, high school kids, they cycle through every 4 years and blah, blah, blah. It's true, but it's like a tread. There's a connection at all times. It's not like a whole game club leaves and it's a whole new set of kids. The freshman becomes a sophomore, becomes a senior, becomes a junior, then a senior, while there's freshmen, sophomore, and juniors behind them. And they're just moving through. And so you get to see the growth in those kids and how it becomes more and more every year. I feel so fortunate to be able to see that. And now we're getting to see where alumni have a desire to come back and help. And we had that in summer camp. But now this is the first. It's the second or third alumni graduate from our high school game club, who is now coming back and wants to regularly help. And so it's kind of like, all right, now we're seeing a bigger community.
Yeah.
It's not just freshmen through seniors. It's now kids that have gone into the workforce or they're at college and they're coming back to continue to be a part of the community because it meant so much to them.
Well, and that's that student, if it's who I think you're thinking of, is just another kind of amazing story, because I don't think I'll go out on a limb and say when he was a freshman, there's no way you would have predicted that he was a kid that was empathetic enough to want to give back and help.
Right.
That's not who he was as a freshman. But he's just coming in of his own free will.
Yep.
He's excited about a game. He wants to share it.
Yep.
Who knows how it's going to turn out, but just that impulse, I don't think we would have seen in him.
Yeah. And I mean, willing to work get a work schedule that works around that game. And oh my gosh, I was like, do not lose your job over game
It's
club.
not worth it, man. It's not worth it.
And of course that's not what he was trying to do, but I just wanted to. And so that just is, it's so cool. And so the things, the observation and research you're talking about, I'm seeing, I see every week in game club. And so, and I can think of a few other students that have gone from freshmen to upperclassmen freshman year, they were not who they are their junior and senior year. And even if they don't become a leader of game club, they are still in their own right a leader of a game or just a leader of a group of kids that they've brought along. And so it's so cool to see all of that. Though those places are where I'm seeing connections, I don't know that I can specifically identify, well, it's because they're playing this game or they're playing this game. Although geopolitics that one's borderline because there's so much interaction. They get up and they public speak, and then they have to negotiate with others. And I might be able to point some things out there, but definitely when we go to community, games and community are massively powerful in a school.
Well, that kind of leads me to my last point, and I think it's sort of your secret superpower is your ability to create leaders, or at the very least, you create the circumstances where leaders can emerge. And I think that's something that would be easy to overlook because it requires you, I mean, once the leaders are in place and are trained, it allows you to step back and catch a breath.
Hallelujah.
But up to that point, it is much more work because you have to identify, you have to approach, you have to convince, you have to hope and trust because some of them, you're not sure if it's going to pan out. But I think that's just the most powerful thing. And as you said, there's the obvious leaders that step up and are willing to take charge of the club as a whole and help with your Steam and Star Wars Day and help with newsletter and things like that. But then there's also this larger group that's just, I don't want to say down a notch, but less visible, who, like you said, have really stretched themselves and said, I want to lead a game.
Yeah. And
that is an experience that a lot of those kids, there would be no other opportunity to develop those skills.
Yeah. And again, that takes time, knowing the school and knowing the culture, and then just having the opportunity to sip. I mean, I'm going to be bluntly honest. And the reason I wanted to develop leaders is because I wanted to give myself a break to either do something else or just to get a break. And so I was like, okay, I got to get some kids in charge here. And so it just sort of worked out that way that then I've kind of developed a way in which to develop those leaders. I use the leaders to say, who do you see in your groups that could potentially do what you're doing right now? And so I take my student leaders' opinions, but then I'm watching as well. And if we have a match, you bet I not go after, it sounds predatory, but I go after that student in regards to, hey, I really like what you're doing here. What do you think about next year? And start trying to sort of foster that confidence first. And then let's talk about what can you do? What can you do? Once they're like, yeah, I think I could do that. So, but without a game club, without RPGs, they're just kids in the hallway going to classes. Granted, they've got sports and they've got drama and they've got other things like that. But I think, I don't know. It's not fair to say I think the game club community is more powerful than any of those. But it certainly is a very diverse group.
Well, for one thing, it's the only activity that, I guess music does this, and music is very powerful, but it's the only activity that lasts the entire school year. So there's more time for them to develop.
Oh, good point.
And we should probably look into this a little more in depth, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say there's a whole lot of kids that this is the only thing they've got at the school.
I can tell you that. At least 1/3 of our kids. Yeah. Last year, 1/3 of our kids did nothing else but game club.
And it's easy to fall into the stereotype of the gamer nerd, but it is wonderful that those students have a place where, as I said, they can let their guard down. Washington is overall, I would say, on the spectrum of high schools, a pretty kind place, but it's still a high school,
right?
And those kids may not fit in many other places, but they do there.
I've said many times that some of my favorite memories and snapshots in my head are looking at a table thinking, I got the valedictorian or a candidate for valedictorian sitting at a table with a student that this might be the only reason they're coming to school.
Yeah.
But they're having a great time. They're laughing. They're making eye contact. And they're on the same plane. They're on an equal playing field, playing a board game or playing an RPG. And so that's powerful.
Yeah.
That is really powerful. So cool. Any other research or anything else you've learned?
No, I tried to summarize it. There's a lot more in-depth things, but I think we've probably given enough of a taste for.
Yeah. And like I said, this is the tip of the iceberg of this conversation. We'd love to hear what all of your thoughts are based on the things we've said. Hopefully we haven't said anything that makes anyone mad, but if you disagree, absolutely, 100%, let us know. Love to hear your thoughts and keep this discourse going. I don't think we ever stop learning. And so a topic of what we learned about RPGs and education is something we definitely can revisit in the future. So with all that said, I think I already gave the email for us, but you can join us on social media, Facebook and Instagram, Teachers in the Dungeon. We are on Twitter at Dungeon Teachers. And don't forget to check out our YouTube page. I can't wait to see the pictures Dan puts out there for this episode. I'm sure they will be wonderful and marvelous. So, all right. Well, so until next time, for Dan, I'm Tom. This is Teachers in the Dungeon. Keep rolling those 20s.